NACDL is the association of the nation's criminal defense bar.
I'm a policy shaper, I'm a public policy scholar, and I see the intersection between the law and the policies created by our decision makers, and more importantly, how those should reflect the needs of the community. Let me tell you a little bit about my team first, and then we'll get right into bail and assessments. I help lead a team called the $1 Million Hoods Project. We're housed in the Ralph J. Bunche Center for African American Studies at UCLA. It's the only Black organized research unit in the UC system. It's 50 years old this year. That picture right there is my team. We're a multidisciplinary team. And as you can tell, we don't look like your average research and data team. We're Black and brown scholars. What you don't see in there is there's probably a half dozen formerly incarcerated scholars who are at UCLA. There are PhDs in education, public health, history, Masters of Public Policy and Urban Planning, all in that picture right there. So I always start my presentation with sharing my team because I'm very proud of my team, and I think the reflection of my team, much like the reflection of your defense, the judges, the prosecutors, and the jury, impact the analysis and capabilities we have of really speaking to the issues and doing the work in a way that really touches the community that we represent. What $1 Million Hoods is it's a mapping project. We collect data all across the state of California, and we're expanding, and we map which neighborhoods we spend at least $1 million a year incarcerating residents from. It's a lot like the $1 Million Box project for those of you from Chicago or New York. Eddie Ellis was one of the original thinkers behind this. And what we do is we ask law enforcement agencies really nicely for all of their arrest and booking data. And then they say, hell no. And then we get our lawyers together and we sue. Public Record Act request. We have a right to this information, especially as a research university. And the data comes nice and clean. That's a joke. Sometimes they give us stacks of PDFs. I'm talking thousands and thousands of records, and they're like, here. You'd be surprised how many different ways the Los Angeles Police Department can spell Los Angeles. Might need a drop-down option or something. But we clean that data, and we train Black and brown scholars at UCLA on how to clean that data. Then we go out into the community. We gather information on the needs of the community, the problems, the issues, and we map and we report. Some of our community partners. I always highlight community partners because I think if you're not really embedded in the community, you're not talking to folks on the ground, folks with lived experience, those have been impacted, the kind of folks that you serve as clients every single day, then you're really not getting the full picture. And so we try to bring the ivory tower of Westwood, UCLA, back to the hood where it belongs. Our website, $1millionhoods.com, you can go on any neighborhood in LA County and see just how much money we spend incarcerating folks, how many days in jail are spent by department. So this is LAPD lockup, which they can only hold you 3 days, and then they have to transfer you to the county jail. And we've got the county's data as well for the sheriff's department. And so you can look it by agency. And because I'm a policy scholar, you can also map it by Senate district, Assembly district, City Council district, because some folks need to know what's happening in the communities that they represent. Let's talk about bail. One of our reports, one of my favorite reports that we did was called The Price of Freedom. And it started with this question, does everyone have the right to pretrial freedom? And the answer is yes. Unequivocally, yes, you have the right to pretrial freedom. And under the current system, as I know that we all know, but I'm going to say it anyway, the current system bifurcates freedom. It exacerbates poverty. If you can afford to pay your bail, you can get out pre-trial. If you can pay it all in cash to the court, you get almost all of it back at the conclusion of your court proceedings. And if you're poor, you have the two other options, arguably a third, definitely a third, but those two options are: one, you can contract with a private bonds agent, pay that 10% fee, maybe buy yourself an ankle monitor, put your mama's house up as collateral. Non-refundable. You don't get that back even if you are found innocent And the other option, you are detained pretrial. As I'm sure you have seen many, many, many times, having never been convicted of any wrongdoing. And the third option, I heard plea deals earlier. That's a very common thing. I know y'all see that all the time, where you are leveraged because you can't afford your pretrial freedom under the current system to take a plea deal because you need to get home because those 3 days, even pre-arraignment, matter. You can lose your home. You can lose your job. You can lose your children. And these have costs in addition to the trauma of being incarcerated, which is often hard to quantify, but we know those costs are astounding. The average bail in California, and I apologize for those of you from out of state, presentation's mostly going to be California centered. That's where I do most of my work, but the average bail in California is about $50,000. Yeah, some of y'all shaking your heads right now because that's like 5 times higher than the median average nationally. In New York, I think 10,000 is about the average. And we'll bring that up later when we talk about revolving bail funds and how that might make a difference. $19 billion. $19,386,418,544 to be exact. That was the price of freedom pre-arraignment in Los Angeles from 2012 to 2016. That means you were arrested, alleged to have committed a crime, and then assessed a bail according with the bail schedule. Here in California, we have a bail schedule. It's quite arbitrary, meaning that it's not consistent across counties. You can commit a crime or be alleged to have committed a crime in Los Angeles, have a bail set at $10,000, go to San Francisco, be alleged of the same crime, and have it at $25,000. It doesn't make much sense. But we took all of this data and we looked at all of the arrest records of folks in Los Angeles who were arrested by the LAPD. And we looked at all the alleged offenses and we corresponded that with the bail schedule. We double checked our records with their records and we added it all up and we got this $19 billion. That went unpaid. 80% of that went unpaid. We recently did 2017, by the way, and that was another $3.4 billion. Most of this bail is levied on communities that don't have it, individuals who don't have it. So we did, because I'm a policy dude, and I'm sorry that looks so wonky, is that bar graph represents every city council district in the city of Los Angeles, and the floating line above it is the employment rate of that city council district. And as you can see, there's a strong correlation with the unemployment rate and how much bail was assessed there. Another way to think about it is how much police activity is going on there, how many arrests are being made there. And for those of you outside of Los Angeles, council districts 8 and 9 are the most over police council districts in the city of Los Angeles. They were also levied the most bail, about 1.4 billion respectively each. Any guesses on where those might be in the city of Los Angeles? South Central? Are you from LA? You just guessing on me. It's South LA. It's South Central. It is where black and brown folks live, almost exclusively. So then I wanted to look at how much was levied by race and gender, and sure enough, it's black and brown folks, which doesn't surprise any of us here because we know that our system is flooded with black and brown bodies. It is interesting to know, though, that black folks in Los Angeles only make up about 8% of the population. We have the largest black population in the country west of the Mississippi by total numbers, but the city of Los Angeles only 4 million people. It's 9%. And then what I did was I got creative with the LAPD data. They told me who got released and what they got released for. OR, bond, cash. And I looked at all the folks that were released by bond. And I took the total bail that was assessed against them, and I conservatively took 10% of that, even though we know it's actually much higher in many cases, 15% or other collateral costs. And even just taking that number, what I found was about $200 million in non-refundable bond payments were extracted from the community just from 2012 to 2016. And to reiterate, these are communities that do not have it. You contract with a bonds agent, as you all know, because you can't afford to put it all up in cash. So you are taking resources that could otherwise be used for childcare, education, and other things that we need to really have a healthy, thriving community, and you're sucking it to promote and uplift a multi-billion-dollar industry that sells a commodity, and that commodity is your freedom. After I did this report, I was kind of like feeling really, really bad. Because what really prompted this report was kind of personal. Saw the child welfare system when I was a kid. Saw the 9 of my siblings when we got adopted. And 3 of my brothers have been incarcerated. One of my little brother just came home this week. So it's been a good week. But when he first got arrested, he was houseless. He was homeless in San Diego. He was suffering from substance abuse, some of the traumas we had endured growing up. He got arrested. His bail was set. I got a call in the middle of the night. I was getting my master's degree at UCLA in Westwood, seeing him as often as I could. I knew he was struggling. I get this call. Is this Isaac Bryan? Yes, it is. I'm such and such from the bonds company. How you doing? Good to talk to you. It's late at night. Your brother Jekiah has been incarcerated, and his bail is $25,000. I said, well, man, I ain't got $25,000. I'm in grad school. I need $25,000. And he said, well, for 10% of that, $2,500, we could issue a surety bond for you. I said, look, man, you're not listening. I'm in grad school. I don't have $2,500. And he said, well, don't you want to see your brother free? Don't you want him out? Yes. Yes, I do. I would very much like him to be out pretrial. And so what you're telling me is if I had enough money in my pocket, or if he had enough money, or if we had other family with enough money, he could get out right now, regardless of the offense that he's been alleged? Absolutely. And it happens all the time. And my brother remained incarcerated pre-trial. And when he showed up to court, like many of your clients, dressed in that good-looking jumpsuit, it doesn't quite look as good as this suit. He ended up taking a plea deal. And I think a lot of those factors contributed to his overall case. So when I did this report, I went down to Men's Central Jail, and I was just walking around just thinking. And I went across the street. And across the street, there was this parking lot. And I'm sure you've all got one in your city. It's not a parking lot, it's a shopping mall. Except there's 12 bail bonds agents in one shopping mall. And as I'm walking, just looking at all of them, all privately owned, all independent, not interconnected, I was thinking to myself, you couldn't put 12 Starbucks in one place and them all have enough business to be sustainable. That is how lucrative it is to sell folks their freedom. And it's been going on like that for decades. And then I encourage folks to think about additional costs. How does this cash extraction impact lost wages, housing, employment, the 3 days that you're missing, the trauma, the criminalization of ever having been incarcerated? How does it impact generations of families like we know that this criminal legal system does in every way? How does the bonds industry and the bail bond system continue to exacerbate poverty and the conditions that spur crime and violence and the things that we would like to do away with? And I started thinking about solutions, because I'm a policy guy, and sometimes you just get caught up in the problems and you start to feel hopeless and like it's all over your heads and there's nothing we can do about it. And one of the things that's going on all across the country is bail funds, revolving bail funds. I know you're all familiar with them, the revolving bail fund, the idea being that you pay the bail in full with cash from the fund, that person gets released, you can then reuse that money to do somebody else's bail. In New York, the Bronx Bail Fund, I think, can cycle $1 3 or 4 times in a year, which is cool, but that's not a solution. And part of the reason it's not a solution is because it doesn't really do away with this underlying problem, because we don't have enough philanthropic dollars or bail funds to get all the folks home who need to be home, who have a right to be home. And 2, as I mentioned earlier, in California, the bail is 5 times as high as it is in other places. $50,000 a pop, you're going to need a real big bail fund. In fact, the Bail Project Robin Steinberg just came to UCLA and set up a bail fund in Compton. And we're trying to start this out, but we're finding that you can only bail out so many folks at $50,000 a pop. So bail funds are not the solution. I would argue, and many others would argue, that the purpose of a bail fund, or the goal of a bail fund, would be hopefully to work itself out of business to where it's not needed anymore. So what are some other ideas? Risk assessments. We're going to talk about that in a second. Paying a refundable percentage to the courts. I heard this idea floated around. Maybe we'll just pay 10% to the courts and get it back and just do away with the bonds industry. That's an interesting idea. There's a lot of state constitutions that won't allow for that, unfortunately. Release by charge severity. Maybe we'll just rank a bunch of offenses and decide that these offenses are guaranteed pretrial release and these other offenses we'll find other mechanisms for. For that idea, and I'll explain some problems or some concerns with that, mainly being, what if you have past justice system involvement, right? What if you're already under supervision? Expanding the use of electronic monitoring. Oh, goodness, Michelle Alexander blew up the New York Times a few months ago. Did y'all catch that? Really warning about this. The expansion of electronic monitoring as a substitute for pretrial incarceration. But electronic monitoring is a form of trauma in and of itself, and many of the ways that these operate pass on costs to those who are monitored and their families. And even if they don't, what does that mean in terms of inflating probation budgets and law enforcement budgets with money that could other be used for community benefits like education, public health, childcare, and other things? And then pretrial services. I think depending on where you're from, the idea of what pretrial services might mean different things. You might have electronic monitoring in your pretrial services. You might just get texts and phone calls and rides to court. The Manhattan Bail Project back in the day was a great example of pretrial services. And I think when it comes to solutions to the current bail problem, pretrial services have to be included, but they have to be thoughtful. They have to be to encourage folks to appear. They have to provide resources and not just monitor folks. But let's talk about California a little bit, because we're in an interesting case study right now. Are y'all familiar with SB 10? That's good. I'm going to find out how familiar you are. SB 10 was a 2-year bill proposed by Senator Bob Hertzberg, gentleman right behind Jerry Brown. I find that picture very interesting, by the way. I'm just going to tell it like it is. Those are the folks who passed bail reform. SB 10 ends the use of cash bail. You can no longer purchase your pretrial freedom in California when it goes into effect October 2019. That's a good thing, right? I think it's a good thing, but one of the first things you learn in policy school is how you define a problem has a lot to do with what solutions are acceptable, right? If you define the problem as homelessness is that there are too many houseless folks on the streets, then a potential policy solution could be sweeping them up and putting them in the county jail. If you define the problem with bail is that cash bail, and a lot of us did this because it was a great selling point to our conservative opposition. If you use the economic argument of cash bail and not remembering to include that pretrial freedom should be ubiquitous and it's a right to everybody, then you might miss the mark. And that's the concerns with SB 10. Because SB 10 incorporates risk assessment tools. Risk assessment tools are being used across the country, New Jersey and other places, Harris County. And the problem with risk assessment tools for the community and for folks that do data work, algorithmic work, is that there's kind of this old saying in data, like bad data in, bad data out, right? And if your risk assessment tools incorporate things that could be proxies of race and poverty, find me something that's not, you could get results that still overly and punitively criminalize the poor and folks of color, as we have been. And now you've replaced an old system that was working quite well if you could afford to buy your pretrial freedom with something where you just aren't going to get out. Passed in 2018, it's set to take effect October 2019, but there's some pushback. And it's interesting where this pushback is coming from. Some of the things I just mentioned, bias and assessment tools, there's also a lot of judicial discretion. In the 11th hour, the Judicial Council in California snuck into the bill legislation. There were a lot of sections that said, an agency will oversee which assessment tools are considered valid, which ones are not. An agency will do this, an agency would do that. Come to find out, just before it goes to get voted on, the Judicial Council now gets inserted as the agency, which for a lot of folks in community, and I'm sure a lot of you, sparks a lot of concern, especially when judges are also on the ballot. And they have the authority to circumvent a risk assessment score. They have the authority to decide which tools are considered valid. Counties fought to have variation, just like the bail schedule, where you could be using a different tool in LA County than you're using in San Diego County, than you're using in San Francisco County, which means you could have the same features and same characteristics and get a different score in each place. And if you've got a different judge in each place, there's a lot of variation and a lot of variables that are not in favor of folks seeking to get their pretrial freedom. And that sparked a lot of pushback. There were a lot of political compromises because we needed the law enforcement lobbying industry to back different parts of this bill. And so there were a lot of carve-outs. For example, if you had been convicted of an offense of a certain caliber before, it was automatic preventative detention, irrespective of what your risk assessment score would be. Who decided what those offenses are? Why is there that carve out if you've only been alleged a new offense and you still haven't been proven of convicted wrongdoing? Have you really lost your right to pretrial freedom? Sex crimes have been put in there. You've been alleged a sex crime, not convicted, not past convicted, but alleged a certain sex crime, preventative detention, right away. You're currently on supervision, and you've been alleged a crime, preventative detention, right away. These kind of carve-outs hurt folks of color. They hurt black folks. They hurt brown folks. They hurt poor folks. Additionally, when you're really thinking about the way this system is getting put together, it hits you like, wow, under the old system, I could have been alleged to have committed a crime. I'm poor. I don't want to lose my job. I need to get out. I've been in a week, so I took a plea. Now I took a plea. I got alleged of the same crime or another crime in my community because my community is over-policed. They spend over $1 million a year locking up folks from my community. And now I'm automatic preventative detention because I took a plea deal under the old system that's now got to, you get where I'm going with this? SB 10 is not quite the solution we needed. And there's another concern with net widening. It's going to be a lot of money for pretrial services. And that pretrial services, there's a lot of talks. The counties have a lot of authority to decide how their pretrial services are set up. And the ankle monitoring conversation, the electronic monitoring conversation is still very much alive and well. There's also a new industry, there's expanded industry that has a stake in that in the same way the bail bonds industry had a stake in the old system. And I would challenge us all in the room to just think about ways we can do better in our states, in our work, and as we continue to do this. But also, this is what's really interesting, is the bail bonds industry in California. I know not every state has this, but we have ballot measures. It means the people can circumvent the state legislator, put something on the ballot, and vote for it in November. The bail bond, it's usually a product of how much money you got. How many people can I pay to sit out and collect signatures and pay for messaging? The bail bonds industry, they passed a referendum quick, fast, in a hurry when SB 10 went through. It was funny, I caught them at UCLA one day trying to get people to sign up. I didn't sign up. But what's interesting about that is community came in opposition to SB 10 when the Judicial Council moved and some of the last minute amendments got put in. And so the bail bonds industry is citing the ACLU, citing the Human Rights Watch, citing Justice LA as to why SB 10 is a bad thing. It's kind of ingenious in a really evil, despicable way. And so in California, we're kind of in this holding pattern where we've passed SB 10, which is an imperfect bill that did get rid of cash bail, but has replaced it with something that The data is telling us, history is telling us, a critical race theory is telling us could be even more problematic. And there's this referendum moving that might be on the 2020 ballot that would just undo the whole thing. So the whole state is just kind of sitting still. Like, do we move? Do we not move? What do we do? I'm moving though, because I'm going to assume that if SB 10 goes as planned, I need to be ready for that. And if SB 10 doesn't go as planned, we're still going to do something, because you don't pass something through the state legislature and put all this time and energy to it just to leave the issue alone. We need data. So I included in your materials a 2-page data memo I wrote to members of the state legislature all up and down the state about what kind of data we need to start collecting now and set up a framework now so that if SB 10 or anything like it comes into place, we can really monitor the racial, economic, and gender equity of such a bill. And you need data from law enforcement agencies, like what I've got at $1 Million Hoods, like what they don't want to give up. They need to be compelled to collect this data at the point of arrest, different variables so that we can track folks through the system. We need court data. Y'all know that's like impossible to get. All right, it's very, very difficult to get court data or appeal to the courts to get court data. We need court data. We need arraignment data. We need assessment tool data. If every county gets to come up with their own risk assessment tool, we need to know what every one of those tools are so that we can run different models to see which ones are bad, which ones are good, while keeping in the back of our mind that they're probably not, there is no such thing as a good one, potentially. So let's not just pick the lesser of two evils, but really be critical about what these instruments do and how they impact folks' lives. We also need court watching data ready to go in case the judiciary doesn't want to help. At UCLA, we launched a criminal justice law program. I won't take credit for that. It's in the law school. There's some amazing scholars in there. And what they've done is partnered with community to encourage community-based organizations to go into arraignments and watch the proceedings and document. This is the person's name, this is their case number, this is their race, their age if it's listed. These were the prosecutor's arguments. This is their defense's arguments. Did they talk about money? Did they talk about employment, housing, other characteristics, the severity of the charge? What was effective? Did they bring up the Humphreys precedent? Did they ask for a bail hearing afterwards? Public defenders. What roles did everybody play and what were the outcomes? And if we collect enough of that, we might be able to see trends with judges, trends with which arguments are most effective, trends with great public defenders. And that's something that I think all of you can do in your home states and in the work that you're doing. We also had a number of public defenders who took on law students to help them with their bail hearings, their arraignment hearings and their bail hearings. Helps with the caseload, also trains the next wave of public defenders and critical thinkers, and also just provides clients with more eyes on the case, more thoughtful arguments, more of a chance to get their pretrial freedom, and those things all got coupled together. Court watch data, Compton Bail Fund, public defenders bolstered up, and we're really trying to make a difference here in Los Angeles, or at least monitor what a difference might mean as we move forward. So what's the role of defense attorneys? Keeping in mind, I'm not a defense attorney, so you can really throw this out the window if that's how you feel. Be cautious of reforms that replace a system that probably should be abolished. Right? Think about what that might mean in terms of reforming the bail system and just ensuring pretrial freedom is ubiquitous. And if there are any exceptions or cases where it is not, that those are few and far between and very much thought out in favor of those who have yet to be convicted of any wrongdoing. Build relationships with community-based organizations led by those who have been impacted. If you are not working with grassroots organizers on the ground, you're not doing enough, even though you are doing amazing work. I think I saw on the sign, Liberty's last line of defense. I believe that. Public defenders change the game. A good public defender changes the game. But partner with community There's a role outside of the courtroom, and some of this is at the political and policy level, and there's organizing to be done, and you can be a part of that. Collectively, you have a voice. Individually, you have a voice, and you are experts in this system, probably second only to those who have been denied their bail and incarcerated themselves. And continue to be courageous. Don't get discouraged, as we often do when we study the system for too long or operate around it too long, or we don't believe change can happen. Change is happening. You are driving change. Formerly incarcerated individuals are driving change. Currently incarcerated individuals are driving change. Scholars are driving change. And if we put all of that work together, we can create a system that is more just and more fair, and something that we can be proud of. And that is the end of my presentation.